Okay, so I'm about to hit broadcast, and then I'm going to wait, 10, 15 seconds, and then once I start talking, we'll be live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's call, Law Clerks Who Look Like the People, Clerkship Tips for Law Students of Color. My name is Zach Gima, and I'm the Director of Strategic Engagement at the American Constitution Society. ACS is a nationwide network of lawyers, law students, judges, scholars, and many others who are committed to upholding the U.S. Constitution in the 21st century by working to ensure that law is a force for improving people's lives. In a minute, I will turn the call over to Chris Punungbayan, the Executive Director of California ChangeLawyers, but I have a few housekeeping notes before we get started. First, please note that today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available after the call. Second, if you'd like to ask a question at any time during the call, please type it into the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen or email it to Emma Gomez at egomez@acslaw.org. We'll be taking questions after our presenters are finished with their initial remarks, but feel free to send them in at any time so they are in the queue. With that, let me turn things over to Chris. Chris?
Thank you, Zach. And on behalf of California ChangeLawyers, the Equal Justice Society, and the American Constitution Society, we'd like to welcome you to this webinar. We have an exciting panel of experts who are going to talk to us about law clerking. And we're conducting this webinar because we want to see law clerks who look like the people of the United States. There is a concerning lack of diversity among law clerks at all levels. In a 2016 survey by the National Association for Law Placement, law clerks of color composed only 21% of all federal, state, and local clerks. This is accounting for 3,300 clerk positions nationally. And if you look even one level lower at who composes that 21%, the statistics are even more shocking. African American men compose only 1.8% of all clerkships, African American women 3.5%, Latinx men 1.9%, Latinx women 3.1%, Asian and Pacific Islander men 2.4%, and Asian Pacific Islander women 3.8%. So our hope is that by providing you important information today, you will be able to learn about what clerking is and why it's important for you to consider for your career and for social change. Maybe you will decide that clerking is for you, and maybe in the long run, you yourself will be inspired to become a state or federal judge. So I'm just going to briefly mention who our panelists are today, and then I'll do a more extensive introduction of them before their presentation. We have Professor Shri who will talk to us about why law clerking is important and why we need diverse and progressive law students and lawyers clerking. We have Taylor Janik, who is a former law clerk herself, and she'll talk about why she clerked and what the experience was like. We have Judge Felton Anderson, who will talk about why law clerks are so important to a judge and what characteristics did he seek in his own law clerks. And we have Tamara Stephan, who will give the top 3 tips that she has given advice to students over her many years of advising law students who are seeking a clerkship. And then, as Zach mentioned, we'll have time for questions. So our first speaker is Professor Shri. She's the founding director of Stanford Law School's Immigrant Rights Clinic. She was named Associate Dean of Clinical Education and Director of the Mills Legal Clinic in spring of 2019. She has represented scores of immigrants facing removal from the United States, with a focus on representing immigrants with past criminal convictions. Professor Shri has received numerous awards, including California Lawyers 2014 Attorney of the Year, Siren's 2017 Legal Advocate of the Year, and 2017 Carol Weiss King Award from the National Immigration Project of the National Lawyers Guild. Before joining Stanford Law as faculty in 2004, Professor Shri was the Associate Legal Director of the ACLU of Northern California and was a staff attorney at the ACLU's Immigrant Rights Project. She was a law clerk for Judge David R. Thompson of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. So I'll hand it over to Shri.
Yes, thank you so much, Chris. So you've asked me to answer two questions. The first is what you get out of a clerkship. And there are many, many things that I got out of my clerkship, but I'm going to focus on four things. The first is clerkships are a really wonderful way to learn how judges make decisions. This can feel very abstract in law school because most of what we do, or what students do in law school, is read decisions. And decisions represent, opinions represent, what a judge has already decided, what facts a judge has already taken to be correct or true, what the judge has decided is the synthesis of the law. Clerking allows you to see how that happens, kind of the behind the mask, if you will. For example, what kind of writing resonates with judges and why, how to present facts, how to handle bad precedent, oral argument, tips, skills, what works, what doesn't. And you get to see a lot of different lawyering styles and how those lawyering styles resonate or don't resonate with the judges that you work with. So I think the first thing is really important, which is really getting a sense of how judges make decisions, and that's something that you can carry with you through the rest of your career. The second thing I would emphasize that students can get out of clerkships is skill building. I got to be a much better writer because the judge that I worked with was a fantastic and experienced writer. So when I wrote a first draft of an opinion, he would edit it many, many times over. And with each round of edits, I saw how it got stronger, how it got better, and how an opinion literally came to life. And so that skill building on many different levels is really, really an amazing thing that many of us can get from clerkships. The third is the mentorship of a judge. Most judges stay in close contact with most clerks rather, stay in close contact with their judges for the rest of their lives. This means that you have someone who really knows you, who can open doors, who's in your corner, who you can turn to for advice as you start your career. And that is just invaluable, especially for students of color, where mentoring can sometimes feel like a scarce resource. Another part of the mentorship equation is that you're connected to a network of former law clerks for the same judge. And those individuals also form part of your mentoring and connection network in really important ways. So the mentorship and connections to the judge and the network of clerks is the third thing. And then the last thing I would emphasize is help with the question, what should I do next? So if you graduated if you're in law school and you still don't know what you want to do after you graduate, which is where I was when I was a 3L, the clerkship can be a really helpful way to expose yourself to lots of different areas of law, different lawyering styles, and the mentorship of a judge who can help you think about the questions of where you might start your career and what might be a good fit for you. And in that way, a clerkship can be helpful not only right after you graduate from law school, but also after you've been in practice for a couple of years and you're ready to pivot to another part of your, or the next step of your career. So I'd emphasize those four things in answering the question of what you get out of a clerkship: exposure to judges, skill building, mentorship, and help with the question of what to do next. The second question you wanted me to address, Chris, is why we need more diverse and progressive students clerking. And there are so many reasons why we need this, and you highlighted one of those in your introductory remarks about how the clerkship, the students doing clerkship should reflect our society as a whole. I think another important reason is that we need a more diverse judiciary. Today's judiciary does not reflect our country, and that has to change. Clerkships are a pathway to one day working as a judge. And it may seem for many law students to be very, very far away, the idea of being a judge, but many students now who are in law school now are the judges of our future, and clerkships are a way to create a pathway for being a judge one day, if that might be something that you're interested in. I also think that clerkships open doors, and particularly doors that we want more diverse students opening. The mentorship and connections that clerkships offer you allow you to form relationships that open doors to new jobs, to new opportunities in your future. And one of the things that I think comes as a surprise to many law students, and did to me as well, is that getting a clerkship is not a meritocratic process. It's not that you do the best you can in law school and magically a clerkship lands in your lap. In fact, nothing in law school works that way, and nothing in the legal profession works that way. And opportunities come from relationships. And clerkships allow you a really important way to make the relationships that will create opportunities for you in the future. And then I guess the last thing I would say is that the reason we need more diverse and progressive students clerking is that diversity is a good thing for workplaces. There are many studies that show that diversity and diverse workplaces create better decision-making, more creativity, and better experiences for everyone, all of the people in the office, not just for the clerks or the individuals who are bringing the diversity. So those are some of the reasons I think that we need more diverse and progressive students clerking. I'll stop there, Chris, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Professor Shri. And one thing I neglected to mention in my introduction of you is that you are a board member of the Equal Justice Society. Our next speaker is Taylor Janik. Taylor is an associate in the Bankruptcy and Corporate Restructuring Department and is based in the New York City office of Cole Schatz. Taylor currently serves as the bankruptcy chair of the Young Lawyers Division of the American Bar Association. Prior to joining Cole Schatz, Taylor clerked for the Honorable Mark X. Mullen, United States bankruptcy judge for the Northern District of Texas, where she actively was involved in the administration and disposition of various issues in Chapter 7, 11, and 13 bankruptcy proceedings. Taylor graduated from Notre Dame Law School in 2018, and while in law school, she was a senior articles editor for the Notre Dame Journal of Legislation and was an extern at the Office of the General Counsel Executive Office of the U.S. Trustees Program. So Taylor will give us a more recent perspective of what it's like to clerk. Taylor?
Hello, everyone. So Chris asked me to answer 3 main questions. How did you know you wanted to clerk? Why did I clerk? And what was the experience like? So I didn't really come to wanting to clerk starting out in law school. It was actually at my externship in DC at the U.S. Trustees Program that my intern coordinator said he had clerked, and he was giving me his experience and why it's something I should really look at after I told him of my interest in bankruptcy law. I wanted to practice that post-graduation. And I had worked at a law firm my 2L summer, didn't end up going with that firm, so I needed something to do after 3L year. So after interning at the U.S. Trustees Program, during that semester, I started applying, and this is 2L spring, so it's definitely later into law school. Started applying to all bankruptcy judges across the United States. I wasn't picky about geographic-wise where I wanted to go. Over that process, I had about 4 interviews from everywhere from Boston to Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, to my last interview was with Judge Mullen in Fort Worth with the Northern District of Texas. The interview obviously went great and ended up accepting a position with him. So that's how I kind of came to why I wanted to clerk. And I knew that clerking was going to give me an experience and provide a jump point to go into a firm, since I didn't have a firm pick, like I hadn't selected a firm my 2L summer. What was my experience like? So Judge Mullen, I would say, is a different kind of judge. He, so when you accept a position with him, he doesn't have a specific, you're working for 1-term year or 2-term years, which is typically how judges work. So his main goal was, you have to stay with him for a year, but you can stay up to 4 years, which is the maximum the federal government will allow under a term clerk. So you can leave at any point, but he didn't want you to leave until you found the job you absolutely wanted to go to. So my clerkship with him, I was out in court every day. Anytime we had a hearing, I was sitting there watching. He was a big proponent of making sure that you saw any and every motion, hearing, trial we had. So, for example, my second day on the job, I watched a full-day trial on a complaint. The other thing that I appreciated about Judge Mullen's clerkship was he was a relatively new judge, had been on the bench for about 3 years. So he still had the perspective of being a practicing lawyer. And after all hearings, we would go back into chambers and he would say, what did you see? What did you think? Was that argument, did you think that that was persuasive, not persuasive? What is your opinion? And then he would give his opinion on how he saw it as a judge, and also if he were a lawyer, what he might have done differently. So you got that perspective as well. Another great thing about him is I did get to work on my writing. I always got to take the first stab at any opinion or motion we wrote. We also had a career clerk in the office, so he also did a lot of the writing. And then finally, one of the great things about my experience with Judge Mullen is we had a very collaborative chambers. So we would each get a shot, like I think, for example, I would say, like, I think this is what the answer should have been. And Judge would give his opinion, and we would kind of argue is probably a strong word, but basically argue our opinion, trying to get the other two on your side in order to come up with what Judge's opinion was going to say. So that was really helped me work on my argument skills and making sure I had evidence to back up what I think the right answer should have been. So that was, I think that summarizes my experience with Judge Mullen. I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards, and feel free, anyone watching this, to reach out to me afterwards as well.
Very good. Thank you, Taylor. Our next speaker is Judge Felton Henderson. I'm very honored to introduce him on our webinar this afternoon. Judge Felton Henderson graduated from Berkeley Law in 1962, where he was one of just 2 Black students in his class, and he was the first Black attorney in the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. In the Deep South, he protected voter rights alongside everyday citizens and visionaries like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In 1980, President Jimmy Carter appointed him to the federal bench, where he has championed transformative justice for nearly 4 decades. Judge Henderson has a remarkable ability and willingness to protect the rights of the vulnerable among us. In 1987, he became the nation's first judge to declare that lesbian and gay Americans, like racial minorities, are entitled to equal protection and due process of law under the U.S. Constitution. While the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals reversed the decision, we know that he was ahead of his time. 28 years later, the United States Supreme Court agreed that lesbian and gay Americans are entitled to marriage equality. With compassion and discernment, Judge Henderson continually enforced limits on the carceral state. He was on the panel that found California's overcrowded prisons violated the Constitution and ordered 40,000 people released from prison. The United States Supreme Court affirmed this decision in Brown v. Plata. Judge Henderson has steadily vindicated the rights of women and people of color. Though his decision was later reversed, he ruled to struck down Prop 209, California's 1996 voter-approved ban on public affirmative action programs. His opinion provoked so many death threats that U.S. Marshals had to stand guard outside his home. Among his many awards are the American Bar Association's Thurgood Marshall Award, the State Bar of California's Bernard E. Witkin Medal, and the Distinguished Service Award from the National Bar Association. Judge Henderson's last day on the bench was Friday, August 11, 2017, and in September, he joined Berkeley Law as a distinguished visitor and continues to champion true justice. Judge Henderson, we're so glad to have you on our panel this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you for that sterling introduction. For the 37 years that I served on the bench, at 5-year intervals, I would hold reunions with my law clerks. I'm just delighted to talk about the importance of law clerks and how much they've meant to me in my career. And at the first reunion in 1985, 9 of the 10 I had hired up until that time showed up. We had a wonderful time. The 10th couldn't make it because she was involved in a massive trial in Boston, and her firm wouldn't let her away for that weekend. By the time of my last reunion, as Chris just mentioned, in 2017, when I retired, I had stopped trying to count the number of law clerks that showed up, because I had hired more than 90 or 80 at that time, almost 90. And they were now bringing their spouses and their children and sometimes their pets, and it was too massive to count. And they were coming from all over the country, Boston, New York, Texas, Colorado, Oregon, even as far away as Switzerland. Now, each reunion for me over these years has been more like a family reunion, much more so than it's been like an office party, although it's an office, but it's family also. We bring each other up to date on our lives, we trade war stories, and they can always be relied upon to tell a few cuties about my many foibles and quirks over the year, and their favorite seems to be that I was the last judge on our court when we went to computers. I was the last judge to learn how to use a computer. And I then only learned it because Senator Barbara Boxer began calling my law clerks at 9:15 every morning and saying, get in there and at least teach them how to do email. So finally I relented and learned how to do email. Later on, my grandson taught me how to text, but I was a slow learner, but they love to tell these stories. Now, all of this is to say that for me, law clerks are like my family, an important part of my family, but they're much more than family. I believe they're the lifeblood of the court. The median caseload over the years I was on the court for the Northern District of California was 335 cases. Now this is an enormous caseload, and it's impossible for me to even imagine processing such a caseload without law clerks who are ready and willing and eager and able to work as hard as necessary to meet all of the important deadlines that come up during the life of a case. So what do I look for in this important position? What do I look for in my law clerk? What are the characteristics of the job? And the first thing I want to talk about, I want to mention that in my first year on the job, I learned a very important lesson about grades. And I want you to understand about the importance of grades, and where they fit into the whole picture. As of my last year as a lawyer, before I was appointed to the bench, I hired a young office assistant, a young student from Bolt Hall, which is what it was called then. And she did a fabulous job for me. She was a great writer. She was fast. She was creative. She was not afraid to challenge me if she happened to disagree. And she was just wonderful. And this was in 1979. Now, fast forward 1 year to 1980. I'm now about to become a judge. And she applies to be my law clerk. And because I knew her so well, I knew she could do the work that satisfied me. I hired her. I didn't even look at her application. It was later on that I got around to looking at her application, her letters of recommendation, her transcript. A bit to my surprise, she wasn't on the order of coif. She wasn't on law review, though she had done well enough. And I want to hasten to mention that she certainly had done better than I did when I was a student at Bolt Hall. But the more important thing that I'm trying to point out is that while grades are an important part of what a judge is looking for, it's not by any means the be-all or the end-all in seeking a clerkship. While there's a base level GPA that most judges, including myself, are looking for, we're looking for much, much more than that. We're looking for someone we think we would enjoy being with for the next year, or in the case of a 2-year clerkship, for the next 2 years. And if you intend to be a litigator upon graduation, and this has already been said by one of our speakers, I can think of nothing that will better prepare you for litigating than a law clerkship. You learn how the system works from the inside out. You see it there daily. You're living it on almost a daily basis. You see some of the best lawyers in the country, and you also see some pretty poor lawyers. And you learn from both. From the good lawyers, you learn how things are done and how to do them. From the poor lawyers, you learn what not to do. And you learn both with the added benefit of getting your judge's critique on that as well. And remember, I'll close with this, that someday your application may be in a pile on the judge's desk. You're fungible. You all can do the work. He's looking for someone that he wants to pull out of that trial to offer the job to. Think about in your applications what you want to put in that file, what you want to distinguish yourself, what that judge is interested in, and make sure you put that in. Be that person, be that mentee that he is excited about, or that reminds him of himself and that he'd like to help you with your career. Be that son or daughter that he sees in the clerkship and become a part of his family. But think about these things. These things are as important as grades. And I hope, if nothing else today, I'm encouraging you to make a go for these law clerkships. They're very wonderful position. Don't be daunted by the grade barrier. And I'd be happy to, my time's up, I'll be happy to answer any questions during the question and answer period. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much, Judge Henderson. And as the judge just mentioned, after our last presenter who's up next, we'll have time for questions. So please submit your questions through the chat box. Our last presenter is Tamara Stephan. Tamara has been Associate Director of Career and Professional Development with Brooklyn Law School's Career Development Center since September 2008, following 5.5 years as the Director of Public Sector Career Planning in the Office of Career Services at Hofstra University School of Law. At both law schools, Ms. Stephan has been responsible for promoting judicial internships, postgraduate judicial clerkships, and diversity opportunities. Ms. Stephan served as a panelist for winning strategies for supporting diverse law clerkship applicants at the 2018 NALP conference and authored a related article, Strategies to Encourage Students to Apply for Diversity Judicial Internship Programs, for the September 2018 NALP Bulletin. Ms. Stephan was a litigation associate for 6 years at K. Scholler, and Ms. Stephan received her JD from Hofstra Law School, where she was an associate editor for the Hofstra Labor Law Journal. Ms. Stephan earned a BS in biomedical engineering from Boston University. And Tamara, we'll hand it off to you.
Thank you. So I don't know if my slides can come up. If not, I'll just talk. Yeah, thank you. So you can go to the next slide, please. So you've heard about clerkships and some talks about applications. So what the application materials are quickly: your resume, your cover letter, your law school transcript. So the judge talked about grades, maybe an undergrad transcript or a graduate school transcript, a writing sample, and 2 letters of recommendation. So I'm going to focus a little bit about the next 2. So next slide, please. Okay, writing samples, certain things that you need to keep in mind. So I know there are people on this call who are post-grad, there are people on the call that are 1Ls. So whenever an application wants a writing sample, you need to pick something that you're comfortable talking about. Also note that some judges don't like law review or journal articles because they're overly edited. The judges are hiring you for your voice, so they need to hear it. So practical advice for those of you who are still in law school: do not wait until your last semester to take your upper level writing requirement so that you have some good writing samples to give. And to think about developing a good writing sample when you take a summer job or an externship or a clinic, or when you're choosing different kinds of coursework. Obviously, there are people on this call who are interested in public interest and progressive kind of work. So if you have a summer job where you are doing a clinic in a courthouse and you're helping people, definitely do that. I'm not saying not to do that, but to make sure during the course of law school you have a couple of opportunities to develop a good writing sample. If you're going to use something from a job or an externship, you need to get the permission of your employer to use it. Don't just assume you can use it, and so state. Also, a lot of times judges say that they want unedited writing samples. That does not mean you give them the first draft with the typos and the grammar mistakes. You need to make sure that everything that you give for any kind of application, but particularly for a judge, is in the best condition that it can be. And keep in mind that some judges and courts require 2 writing samples. So to keep that in mind, regardless of what year you are in law school, to think about creating good writing samples to use for applications. Next slide, please. So recommenders. So you need people who can say wonderful things about you, particularly about your writing and your analytical ability, but you also want to pick people who can talk about your personality and your work ethic. The judge spoke about, grades being a baseline, but there are other things. And these are the other things that can help you. So most of the time, students and alumni go to faculty, and most tenure track faculty have clerked. So you want to take advantage of certain things. It's my experience that, from personal experience, but just experience working at a law school, it's not uncommon for students of color, for first-generation law students, for immigrants, for students who are introverts, not to necessarily reach out to professors. There's something a little uncomfortable about that, but try to take advantage of office hours. Do not think, oh, I have to have the perfect answer to everything, so I can't go talk to a professor. A lot of these letters of recommendation are done by faculty. So go to office hours, consider becoming a research assistant for a professor. That shows that you can do research and writing, which is what you're going to be doing for the judge. And then the faculty member gets to know you. Try to take seminar classes or classes where it's a small class and the professor gets to know you. They can write wonderful things about you only if they know you. And also consider the faculty advisors for the student groups, be it law review or BALSA or what have you. They get to know you in a context. I put past supervisors, but any kind of supervisor. So if you're going into a job, an externship, a clinic, remember that this person, you want to do a great job for them because they're going to be your supervisor, but also they're going to be your recommenders for a clerkship or anything. So keep that in mind when you're working, that you get to know them and they get to know you and they can say fabulous things about you. So next slide, please. So yeah, so Chris had asked me to say top 3 things, so of course I put 4 things to keep in mind. If you have the opportunity in law school to do a judicial internship or externship, consider doing that. That'll give you an opportunity to see what it's like to work in chambers, to develop a relationship with a judge and a clerk, the judge and the clerks, and see what it's like if you like it, and it'll help you and you want to emphasize that when you're applying for clerkships. However, if you've already graduated or you're a 3L and you haven't had a chance to do it, it's not a barrier to a clerkship that you didn't work for a judge before, but it's something to consider. Another thing to keep in mind, you can clerk at any time, not just upon graduation. I think sometimes people get upset if they didn't get a clerkship right when they're graduating, that they can never do it again. You could clerk at any point in your career. And in some cases, you are a stronger applicant a couple of years out. And there are some judges that don't hire people straight out of law school. They have a preference for people who've worked 1 or 2 years. So definitely can think about that. Consider all kinds of clerkships, federal, state court, staff attorney positions, pool clerks. I think sometimes people are a little myopic on the type of clerkships that they want. So consider these great opportunities. And also, I know some of the people on this call are interested in the public sector, and a lot of that stuff is done in state court. So whether it's family law or criminal law, think about state court clerkships. And sometimes it would be great if you have a clerkship one-on-one with a judge. But again, some of these pool clerk and staff attorney positions, you're working for the whole court. That's a great experience. And sometimes people go from those pool clerkships to work for an individual judge. So you want to consider that. Also, do not get too stuck up on the terminology of the position. So I'm in New York State, and some of the state court clerks are actually called law secretaries. And I can understand why somebody would be put off by the term secretary after paying for 3 years of law school. But that is just the term for the line. So don't get offended by that, but think about that. The other thing, which I think wraps up a lot of things that the other panelists have said, There's issues about grades and those kinds of things. For me, journal and rank are a proxy for you're smart and you can write well. So if you're honor journal and you're ranked high, that's great. But if you're not, there are other proxies for you're smart and you can write well. For example, you're smart and you can write well. So you need to actually emphasize certain things. So maybe you've done outside writing competitions. Maybe you've received competitive merit scholarships. Maybe you've done diversity fellowships. Maybe you've done public interest fellowships. Those show that you've already been vetted. And again, those are opportunities for people to say fabulous things about you. So you want to make sure that you emphasize those in your application. So the last slide, please. So if you're interested in applying for a clerkship, in addition to this webinar, there are a couple of things. If you're interested in federal court, there's a website that's called Oscar, so the link is there. If you're interested in postgraduate state court clerkships, Vermont Law School, God bless them, put together this state postgraduate judicial clerkship resource. And so the link is there. It's password protected. So if your law school subscribes, you can ask your career services office for the password information. Also, use your law school. So whether you're a current law student or you're an alum, use your law school if you're interested in clerkships. Talk to your career services office. Some schools have a specific judicial clerkship advisor. Talk to that person. Some schools have a faculty clerkship committee, so make sure to use that. And I realized there's something I forgot to mention when I was talking about all types of clerkships to consider. Also consider administrative law judges, both on the federal and the state level. So immigration court is actually part of the DOJ. So if you're interested in something like that, you need to consider ALJs. And so that's where I'm going to end it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tamara. And we actually have quite a bit of time for questions and answers. So I'm going to hand it off to Zach to pose the questions from the chat box to specific panelists.
Thank you very much. And just as a reminder, you can add questions by using the chat box, as Chris said, or emailing Emma Gomez at egomez@acslaw.org. A couple questions we received relate to strategizing about applications. So to the extent that people are thinking about either extracurricular activities, whether it be law review or moot court, or ways to bolster maybe bolster transcripts that are not straight across 4.0s. What are some considerations for those applications?
That can be for any panelist who's willing to take that.
I can say what I did. I was not a 4.0 student. I was on a journal, but I was not on law review. Kind of what Tamara was saying, when I was on Oscar and I was looking at applications, a lot of them would say 25% or top 10%. I just bypassed that and ignored it and still applied if I thought that I might be a good fit. So my application, I did externships. I didn't work for a judge. So I had different stuff specifically for bankruptcy to show I'm interested in bankruptcy. Here are the other things I've done, in hopes that a judge would see that while I'm not top 10% and I'm not on law review like he'd asked, I have other qualities that are beneficial.
To reiterate some of the stuff that I said, of course, if you're on a journal or in moot court, you sell that, but there are other proxies to show that, and having a rich resume with experiences, be they pro bono, be them student groups, what have you, and getting to meet people, whether it's your supervisors, your coworkers, your faculty, all of those things help. The professor talked about life not being a meritocracy, and a lot of it is relationship building. So the earlier you build those relationships and maintain those relationships, because the people who can say wonderful things about you will tell those wonderful things to the judge, and those things will help you along the line.
Thank you. Next question, Zach.
Yeah, we also have a couple questions about clerking a couple years after graduating law school. And so for people who have a couple years of practice in the mentorship experience might be a little bit different from somebody who is just coming up from law school. So could any of the panelists speak about sort of what the mentorship experience is like, sort of for students who are clerking 2 to 3 years after graduation, or what some of the benefits are for looking to clerk after having worked for a while?
I'm happy to start us off. This is Shri. Shri can tell you. I think a couple things. One is this connects actually to the question that was previously asked about grades. For one other option for students who are worried about their grades and or who haven't had a chance to make those relationships that have been discussed on this webinar is to take a couple of years and to take that time to solidify and make the connections and relationships and get some work experience under your belt, because that can often help with connecting people to clerkships. You will meet people in your jobs that are former law clerks who have relationships with judges, and that can be incredibly helpful. So we do see a lot of students now who wait a few years. And the other part of the equation, of course, is that some judges, as has been mentioned already, prefer to hire law clerks who have a couple of years of work experience. So it works out from both sides.
Okay. This is Felton Henderson. From my own experience on the bench, whenever I got applications from people who had been out of law school for a while, and it's based on the story I told earlier about my own experience of how I discovered that first law clerk who had worked for me, and I knew the work. The recommendation and who that recommendation is coming from becomes very important. A law clerk that was my career law clerk came to me from after a few years with one of the major law schools in San Francisco and decided that he wanted to try a clerkship. He had a good record, but I also had friends at that law firm, and I called them, and I think I relied, and this may just be my style, but I relied more upon what I heard from my friends about him and the things I was looking for in a law clerk than I did from looking back at his record and his writing. So I think that's important, and that goes to one of our other speakers talked about networking. Be a presence, be there, be known as someone that when they're asked about you, they'll speak up for you and say what needs to be said to get you a clerkship.
Zach, next question, please.
Great. We have a couple questions about deciding which judges and which courts to apply to. So what are some things that people should be thinking about when deciding which specific judges to apply to and what courts might be make the most sense for them to send applications to?
Well, I always tell students to think about where they want to be. So part of it's geography. So if you're like Taylor and you're geographically flexible, you have more options than if you're very narrow. Sometimes people are interested in a particular practice area, so be it bankruptcy, be it family court. So sometimes that is how you choose between courts and judges. Some people have a preference for trial work, some people have a preference for appellate work. So you have to think about what it is that you're interested, what it is that your experience speaks to. So that's how you can help narrow it down, and also just realistically about what is a better match for you credential-wise. So you can't start off with the Supreme Court of the United States. So those kinds of things that you need to figure out, but whether you want trial, whether you want appellate, if you're interested in general civil stuff or particular practice area, criminal law, family law, what have you. And then geography, how flexible you truly are, and whether you want state court or federal court.
I think this is Felton again. I think that this is a very important decision that you make, which judges you look for, and you should do a lot of homework on this, because judges differ and they play different roles in clerks' careers. Some judges hand you an assignment, and they expect you to turn in that assignment at a certain period of time, and they edit it, and there's not a lot of personal interaction. Other judges love being mentors. Other judges consider themselves to be conduit on your path upward, and they take great pride in trial courts and how many of their clerks they can get a circuit court clerkship, or that move on up to the Supreme Court. So you need to look at what you want. If you want a one-year clerkship for the experience, then you should look at the judge you're working with. You can get very, very different experiences with different judges. If you're looking for a judge who can help you up the ladder, you want to go on and you want to eventually get to the Supreme Court, then there are judges that play that role. But you should do some research, and there is word out there, and you should find other clerks. There are clerks out there, and ask them about. They will know the judges on the court that they served on, and just do the homework that's necessary. And I think you'll find the kind of judge that will fit into your career plans.
If I could add to that, I definitely think that doing your homework is a really important part of this, and there are lots of different ways within the law school community that you can get that information. You can get it from your law school's clerkship committee. A lot of Stanford, for example, is a faculty committee, and set up an appointment with some of the professors on the committee and ask them who would be a good judge for me based on these are the things I'm interested in. Get advice from as many people as you can. Some law schools will have, 3Ls who have gone through the clerkship process will have spreadsheets of the information that they've gathered, and they'll be willing to share that with you. So try to connect to folks who already have clerkships and have gone through it, because they can share what they have. And then the other thing that I'm finding more and more important is for law students to reach out to people who have clerked for that judge before from the same law school. So we keep a list, for example, of Stanford students who have worked for different judges. And it can be really important to reach out to that clerkship network and say, I'm really interested in clerking for Judge Henderson. Tell me about what that clerkship is like, and let me learn, what is he looking for in a law clerk? How can I make sure that I emphasize the things that he's really interested in? So really doing your due diligence on all of those fronts can be very, very helpful.
We have about 10 more minutes for questions. Next one, Zach, please.
Yep. So we have a couple of 1Ls asking similar questions. So being new to law school and not having different levels of comfort in the setting already, but knowing that the building relationships with professors is important. What are some first steps people can take to doing that? Obviously, going to office hours is important, but if someone doesn't even know what they should be talking about in that setting, or is at first intimidated to do that, what are some things that 1L specifically should be thinking about in trying to build those relationships?
From my experience, so my two recommenders, one of them she ended up being my 1L property professor, but I used her as a recommender because I ended up taking 2 seminar classes with her later on. So I got to know her more on like a personal level because it was a smaller class. So then I felt comfortable asking her for recommendation. And then my second recommender was my intern coordinator at my externship, who got to know me and my writing. So he felt comfortable recommending me. But if I was a 1L, just finding, I knew I really liked that professor in her class, so I took more classes with her, knowing even if I didn't clerk, but maybe something else I needed a recommendation for later on down the road, she would be in a position where she would be willing to write the recommendation because she knew me, she knew my work. We had talked outside of class.
I would say if you're a 1L, now that you know this, it's in the back of your mind. And so it'll be easier. So now you know to talk to the professor. And I understand why it might be scary to do some of this stuff. But that you know, okay, I will try to talk to this person after class, outside of class, that I will go into externships and things thinking this person might be a recommender for me, that I should not just do my work, but also just be personable and talk to people or mention what I'm interested in. Sometimes I have students who are interested in an area of law, but they haven't had that professor. You know, you can send someone an email that simply says, I'm interested in this area of law. My career counselor told me that I should reach out to you to pick your brain and discuss this. And you can do that. And there are people at the law school who can help you, whether upperclassmen, your career counselor, whomever, who can help you sort of script what it is if it is incredibly frightening for you to do it. But there are so many people out there willing to help you. You just didn't realize that they're there for you to help you. So, and don't feel bad if you reach out to someone, they don't respond right away. You know, every once in a while there's that person who doesn't respond, but there are so many people who really do want to help you. You just never knew to ask them. And so if you ask them, they'll be so willing to help you.
I would add one more thing as 1Ls, which is I agree with everything that's been said. You know, reach out to people, reach out to the people you're more comfortable with. And this is a reason we need to have more diversity on faculty as well. But one other thing that can be really helpful is if you see a posting for a research assistant, apply for that, because it's a really great way to get to know a professor in a small group setting. And, you know, I couldn't agree more that the best thing you need is someone who really knows you and knows your writing. So if there's some topic that you're interested in and there's a professor saying, hey, I need a research assistant to help with that topic, apply even as a 1L and get to know somebody on a substantive issue where your writing can be something that you share.
Excellent. I think we maybe have time for 2 more questions.
Okay, one should be maybe a quicker question is thinking about timeline. So judging from your graduation year and when applications should be sent in, what are some benchmarks and timelines people should be thinking about?
All right, so this varies depending on whether you're applying for federal and state. It also depends on when you're graduating. So I'll do federal first. If you are applying for federal judges and you're the class of 2021, there is a hiring plan that has specific dates. So if you go on Oscar, it'll talk to you about it. But class of 2021, you'd have access to Oscar on February 5th, 2020. And the earliest your applications could be released is June 5th, 2020. If you're interested in federal clerkships and you are earlier than the class of 2021, there are no dates. You can apply to anything when you want. If you are the class of 2022, we have no idea what's going to apply to you. It may be a similar plan to this. We're not sure. But basically, under the plan, it would be you're applying between your 2L and 3L year for federal judges. That's the earliest. It's not the be-all, end-all. I always tell this to students, judges can do whatever they want. So there's different judges have different timelines. So some judges may not follow and hire people so early. They might, decide a different time. State courts vary from state to state and from court to court and from judge to judge. So there are some state courts that hire clerks as early as second semester, second year, but the bulk of them will do their hiring between the summer of 2L and 3L year or during the course of 3L year. And again, they're always judges who want people post-grad as opposed to during. So this is the kind of thing you specifically talk to the resources at your law school with respect to geographically where you want to be and which court you want to be, because there are quirks with different systems. But that's the basic timeline.
Add to that don't be afraid. Over the years that I was on the bench, each year I would get calls from people who were thinking about applying to me and just asking, when did I want applications? When did I accept them? Because as the previous speaker just said, it's a jungle out there, and judges break the rules, and they're looking for, some of them, for the best law clerks, and they'll jump the gun. So find out the judges you think you want to clerk for, and then find out what they're looking for, not what the general rules are. These can lead you astray, and you might end up filing later than you should or earlier than you should. But don't be afraid to call chambers. The secretary or the law clerk that answers will be happy to tell you just what that judge wants. And I would strongly suggest you do that.
So last question and then a quick answer.
Yeah, I realize this can be the last question, and sorry, this may be more a little bit complicated to do quickly, but we'll see what we can do. So many students, especially first-generation law students, feel the pressure to go to law school and come out with as big of a paycheck as possible. But what are some ways to think about thinking about clerking as relates to potentially putting off going to a law firm or putting having a lower initial salary with a clerkship?
As someone who just got done clerking, for a federal judge, I'll tell you the paycheck is not as small as I thought it was going to be. I will tell you I made about $66,000 in Dallas-Fort Worth area, because different regions have different cost of living increases, and we had just gotten an increase when the government reopened after shutting down, so it went up from $65,000 to about $66,000. Not law firm money, but you were comfortable enough. And then for someone who had student loans, I just enrolled in a plan that had my payment lower in order to clerk and not have to pay the full amount that was due. I think it's still beneficial, because then when I got my law firm job, I got an increase in salary because I clerked than if I'd come in like right after law school. Also, some law firms will give you a bonus that is substantial to compensate you for taking that year or 2 years off for clerking. So it really just depends on federal versus state. I think state, you make a little bit less. Federal government, you're comfortable depending on where you live. If you live in New York City, it's going to be a little bit rougher, but Fort Worth, it was fine.
Very good. Well, that's all the time that we have for today. I want to thank all of our distinguished panelists for telling us why law clerking is important, giving us insights into what the experience is really like. For Judge Henderson, for telling us what qualities you sought in a clerk, and Tamara for your top 4 tips on obtaining clerkships. This was a rare and insightful glimpse into this somewhat mysterious world, but we hope we made the process a little more clear. The organizers of this webinar will be following up with all of you with additional resources. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact me, and I can direct your questions to the appropriate panelist, or if they're for myself, I'm at chris@ChangeLawyers.org. Again, my email address is chris, CHRIS, @ChangeLawyers.org. Thank you again, and have a great day.